A Musical Life with composer, author, conductor, and artistic director of the Masterworks Festival, Dr. Patrick Kavanaugh. Dr. Kavanaugh is the author of several books that deal with faith and the arts, such as Spiritual Lives of the Great Composers. As a composer himself, he has a fascinating specialty that expands the musical language as most folks know it. Dr. Kavanaugh came to music relatively late, and his first exposure to the world of classical music will really surprise you. This episode of A Musical Life is brought to you by the Masterworks Festival, an intensive 4-week summer festival for advanced and passionate students of the classical performing arts. Visit masterworksfestival.org for more information. Once again, that web address is masterworksfestival, all one word, .org. Welcome to A Musical Life. I'm Hugh Sung. I've known Dr. Kavanaugh for over 20 years, and yet his interview is full of wonderful surprises. I'm ashamed to say that this is the first time I've gotten a chance to actually hear some of his compositions. Maybe that's why we're still friends? Well, all kidding aside, his compositional focus is really fascinating, and his musical origin story is one of the most unusual ones I've ever come across. Dr. Kavanaugh, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, Hugh.
Is it okay for me to call you Patrick?
That would be perfect. Patrick would be just fine.
Oh, thank you. So, Patrick, you're known for being the founder, conductor, and artistic director of the Masterworks Festival, which is a 4-week intensive summer program for the performing arts with a core spiritual emphasis. You're also a prolific author, having written several titles that explore spiritual perspectives on the arts, one of the most popular of them being Spiritual Lives of the Great Composers. And while many folks may know that you're a composer, I'm not sure they realize or understand that your specialization is in microtonal composition. Can you tell us a little bit about what microtonal music is, and maybe tell us about some of the works that you've composed?
Well, thank you. It is a well-kept secret. I have so few friends left, Hugh.
Because of that?
If you really want to know, I truly believe that microtonality, or at least as I'm using it, I see it as the future of classical music. I know that's an incredible statement. If we had about 8 hours, maybe I could spend more time on it. But I really see, as you look at the history of music, especially in the last 1,000 years or so, and in particular, if you will, the evolution of music theory as we look at intervals and they get smaller and smaller, and we accept them more as constants instead of dissonance. When we finally got into the 20th century, obviously it came to where a lot of composers were like, well, what do we do now? We've gotten it down to even the smallest intervals sounds fine. It doesn't sound that dissonant anymore. And, a lot of different composers think, try this, try that. There's been all kind of reactions, but I just keep going. I really do feel strongly about the possibilities of equal temperament in other systems. I use 31 tones per octave a lot, 19 tones per octave a lot. There's just a lot more out there than meets the eye.
Now, let's just step back for a second. We've just thrown around a whole bunch of terms that have probably flown over a lot of folks' heads. For the vast majority of folks who listen to music, Western music, we basically have 12 different notes that we work with as most of the lingua franca for Western classical music, or even pop music, or jazz, or anything. If you look at a piano, you have 12 different keys that repeat over and over again. So what you're describing are the sounds or the pitches in between each of those keys. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. That's where the action is, Hugh.
Now, wait a minute. How can I splice my piano? I can't. How can I squeeze more notes in between those keys? Is that possible on a piano?
Well, again, obviously there are practical considerations. There are a lot of different things you can do with internal tuning on a physical piano. I've actually seen a piano in 19 tones equal temperament where you split the octave into 19 instead of 12. Yeah, but a lot of this is done these days, of course, through electronics. I do use a lot of computers. And I just happen to be a composer that loves normal instruments. I still love to write for string quartet and flute and piano and. So I don't just stick with electronics. I see the electronics often help us to bring the other instruments into line, if you will. I mean, think about it. Years ago, there were, you couldn't play chromatics, for instance, all the little steps on a brass instrument, like a trumpet or a horn. And they realized we really need to do something about this. So eventually they started making horns and trumpets that you could. Otherwise, they might have gotten left behind. And I think as we see history continuing in the next 200 years or so, I think you're going to see that with a lot of natural instruments that are going to be helped into the microtonal field, if you will.
And it's certainly something that Eastern instruments are much more familiar with than we are here in the West. They really do hear in between the pitches that we listen to, and it's a whole new world to explore.
It really is. There's so many possibilities for it. Again, I'm like you. I love Bach. I like Beethoven. I love Brahms. Those will not be forgotten. But if we're going to do what they did in our day, then we need to push the barriers out a little bit. You mentioned the 12 tones that most people write on, and I think that's great, but I'm kind of glad Beethoven didn't write like Palestrina. I'm glad Stravinsky didn't write like Beethoven. I think that we need to continue. Beethoven himself said, art demands that we not stand still. And one of the key areas to hear is pitch. So again, I realize that not every composer out there is into microtonality. I will pray for them. What can I say? That's what I feel very called to do.
How is the audience for microtonal music these days?
Well, as you can well imagine, we have a long way to go.
It's rather micro at this point.
That's well said. Can I use that joke in future interviews? Yeah, it is. There's no question about it. I mean, let's face it, we already have the whole tsunami, if you will, of popular music has hit just the normal classical music world pretty hard in the last few decades. And then when you get into, the contemporary classical music, it does get a bit micro, but this doesn't bother me. And, Bach only had, I think, 10 pieces published in his lifetime.
I didn't know that.
Beethoven's audiences were not as big then as they were today. We just have to, as a composer, I feel compelled to write what is within me. This is what it is. If no one loves it for 200 years, that just doesn't bother me that much.
It's fascinating. There are many different thoughts on the role of an artist. Some artists work commercially. They try to work in a way that pleases people, that maybe pleases commercial entities. And then there are other artists that are, like in your case, I would say prophetic. They write because they need to tell a different kind of truth than perhaps a truth or something that most audiences are comfortable or used to hearing. You're almost the kind of musician that wants to say something that's beyond what audiences want to hear, and you're okay with that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, I might feel differently if I didn't have another job. I would starve to death rather quickly. But at the same time, I look at art and I say, sure, anytime you do a performance, there is, shall we say, an entertainment point of view. We want to entertain your audience. But I would say, in addition to that, there's a place for challenging the audience. And that, to me, is a basic difference between, I think, classical music and a lot of popular music. Again, these are great generalizations. But I would like to see that, there's a place for entertainment, but there's also a place to be challenged, to be stretched, to go a step further. And that's where my microtonal compositions come into play.
So, Patrick, if I recall correctly, I understand that you studied classical guitar. I'm wondering, did you ever try to pursue a career with your guitar playing?
It's interesting you should ask. Again, a kind of little known fact is I actually began in high school as a very successful rock guitarist. Hard to
Oh,
believe. Yes, yeah, I did a lot of crazy stuff back then. That was in the days of, Jimi Hendrix and Cream and all that, and we played loud, hard, heavy rock. And I made, frankly, a fortune doing it. And then what happened was I actually met, this was, gosh, I guess I was 16 or 17 years old. I met a girl that had she was a flute player and she had been raised with Bach and Beethoven. I had never even heard these terms. I had never heard any classical music in my life. And
really?
here I was going on stage, setting guitars on fire and making all this money. And she turned me on to classical music. And I just, well, it was like a duck to water. I just went crazy with it. I immediately bought a classical guitar and a bunch of Segovia recordings and learned to read music, which I didn't even know how to beforehand, like a lot of, rock guitarists. And I just never looked back. I mean, that was a long, long time ago. I went into I obviously went into undergrad school but all my degrees even then, even as an undergrad, right up to my doctorate, are all in music composition. I've always been a composer. I love the guitar. Christopher Parkening is a very close friend. We've done a lot of neat things. He actually wrote the preface to the book you just mentioned, The Spiritualized the Great Composers. I'm not in his class as a guitarist, of course, but I do love the guitar. I have a lot of good friends that play. I mostly, again, think of myself more as a conductor and a composer.
I want to explore this a little bit more. Tell me a little bit about this rock career that I never heard of. How old were you when you first started playing electric guitar? And were you seriously pursuing a commercial career as a rock guitar player?
Oh, absolutely. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I mean,
Oh,
it's
there you
not
go.
exactly the mecca of classical music, I suppose, though they do have some very fine classical musicians there and a great orchestra. But I guess, how old are you in the eighth grade? I'm trying to remember, 10 or
You'd be
12,
about 13.
something like that. Someone literally put a guitar in my hands, and I don't know how to describe this, but it just felt right. I never had any lessons. I was playing professionally within about 8 months of that.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
when you
don't
say
know.
professionally, what does that mean?
I was playing in two different Nashville studios, and I played later in another one as a sideman for 2 years. And then we started the bands, and I was playing in three different rock bands every weekend. Frankly, making a lot of money. I mean, there was a lot of money to be made if you played, serious rock guitar in those days. Probably still is, but as I say, those days were a long time ago. This was back in the 60s, Hugh. You don't even remember that far back.
What was it about the classical music that you were exposed to that made you fall in love so passionately and so abruptly? What was it about that I mean, it sounds like it would be such a foreign, strange, alien art form. I'm just surprised that you took to it so quickly and with such abandon.
Well, you have beautifully described exactly what happened. I just dove into it with reckless abandon. I think part of the reason, now again, this is just my story, and I certainly don't want to in any way knock, rock music or popular music, whatever. There's a lot of great people, including some dear friends that are in all these. But for me, after about 4 years of playing, rock every week, including some of it. Yeah, it was fairly mindless, but some of it, was challenging. You had to really learn all the George Harrison licks and the Eric Clapton licks, and I mean, so it wasn't necessarily all bad, but a lot of it was just 3 and 4 chord stuff, and it just got kind of boring. I don't know any
Hmm.
other way to say it. I was just so bored that I was actually considering even leaving music entirely. I had friends in the studios that were, they say, if you can just play here until you're 30, you can retire a millionaire.
Oh my goodness.
And I was kind of on that track. But then suddenly, I discovered the Brandenburg concertos and I discovered the Beethoven symphonies and I discovered, and to me, it was just like awakening in this beautiful new world. I mean, it's almost it was certainly a great spiritual experience. It was almost like waking up in heaven. I cannot describe, and I'm still just as passionately in love with it as I was the first time I heard. I still remember Bach's Brandenburg Number 1. That was the first classical piece I ever heard. And I still think it's one of the greatest pieces ever written. But just imagine someone had never, ever, ever heard Beethoven's Fifth, never, ever, because it just wasn't in my family. I had wonderful, loving parents, but my dad was a postman, mom was a nurse. They just didn't know Bach and Beethoven, and suddenly they dropped, this. I found myself in a whole new world, and not just a new. It wasn't even similar to the music world I'd known at. It seemed like an unlimited plane, like finding yourself on a new planet. And I would literally go down to the library at Nashville. That was in the days of LPs. You remember those big old things?
I sure do, and they're becoming
Yeah.
popular again.
And I would just spend the entire day in the music library with headphones, listening to Beethoven symphonies and Brahms sonatas. And, I just couldn't get enough. It was like a starving man that was just suddenly dropped into a feast, or someone that had been in the desert and suddenly here's cool water. Those are the kind of expressions I still use to describe it. It was life-changing.
It's absolutely fascinating hearing you recount this incredible discovery. I'm curious because you're a very spiritual musician. You're a Christian. I'm wondering, you described the music, your discovery of classical music almost as a spiritual awakening. Were you already a professing Christian at that time, or did that happen concurrently or beforehand? What was the timing of, I guess, your spiritual development in relationship to your classical music discovery?
I appreciate you asking because it really was almost concurrent. In all fairness, my parents raised me in a nice church and stuff, and it was good, and we learned the golden rule and some good things. But it was still fairly background, if you will. But about the same time, this is quite fascinating as I look back, but just about the same time that I get so turned on to the joy of classical music, I also, for the first time, read the Sermon on the Mount and read the words of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And again, it's fascinating that on a musical level, I was suddenly dropped into a new planet. And almost the same time, certainly the same year, was when I really found myself getting serious about my faith and wanting to follow Christ and to do a better job as a Christian. I mean, frankly, I still don't do half as good a job as I should, and I want to do better. But it was at the same time, and that's why I think it's so fascinating that I've spent my life, most of which with the Masterworks Festival, which is not only classical music but also has a tremendous spiritual component as well.
It's interesting. Every once in a while, I do these interviews, and the folks I'm speaking with turn my questions inside out, upside down. So I have this question written out, but I'm realizing it's probably not not applicable. But I'm going to go ahead and see if I can rephrase this anyway. I was actually phrasing this question more from the perspective of my own understanding of what a typical classical music education is like. And I had wrongly assumed that you had gone through the same thing from an early age, and to hear you discovering classical music at a relatively late age is really fascinating. But I'm going to go ahead and just ask this because I still think it's a relevant question. Okay. Now, for most serious musicians, our training really focuses on mastering the technique of our instruments. And for classical musicians particularly, we have to understand and have a thorough understanding of the repertoire. Now, in a classical music educational setting, we become very proficient in the pursuit of how to play an instrument. But as you were describing with your discovery, it's very rare to start addressing the questions of why we make music. And I just wanted to touch on how your Christian faith, being such an integral part of your artistic pursuits, even though perhaps it was just being blooming at the time that you describe, I'm wondering if, looking back now, how does your faith address why we make music?
That's a very profound question. The two things that immediately come to mind, one is as music as communication between one another. Obviously, communication is sometimes used, as a composer, I've often objected to thinking of music as merely a communication between human to human. But certainly that's a tremendous power that musicians have that, gosh, I hope this doesn't sound terrible. I sometimes feel sorry for non-musicians that they don't have this incredible ability to communicate on such a heart-to-heart level. And so I do think that is a tremendous why we do music. We do it to share our heart. When I hear, just almost any piece that this morning I was listening to a Brahms piano trio, the B major, that opening cello solo. When I hear that, it just speaks to me of beauty that cannot be described in words, beauty that I would even submit that can't be found in visuals and visual art. I mean, again, please don't misunderstand me. I love to go to museums. I love visual art. But there's something about the power of music, even the ambiguous nature and ambiguity of music that makes it beyond words. So there's no question communication one to another is a huge piece of it. I don't think God put us here to be, no man is an island. We need one another. I need you. You need me. We need to love one another. We need to really sacrifice to love one another. I once heard Einstein was once asked, why are we here? And he said, we are here to serve one another.
Hmm.
That to me, that strikes me as a wonderful thing with music. When you play music, you're serving your audience. When you're playing music, you're serving one another. Certainly in a chamber music or an orchestral situation, you see that. And of course, secondly, I feel very strongly about using music to worship the Lord. I know this is controversial these days because there are so many different people from different backgrounds, and I certainly respect them all. We certainly do at Masterworks Festival. We're not here to tell you we have all the answers, because we don't. We know the Lord, God has all the answers, but we don't. But I think that, we have an inborn desire to worship. And I don't know about you, but I can do it better with music than I can any other way. I can't often find the words to express myself, to cry out to God. I find many times I don't even know how to pray, but in playing, and even as a composer and writing, and I know many composers in history have done this, it's just an act of worship between you and the Lord, whether there's an audience or not, whether anyone ever hears it or not. It's something very intimate between each person and God.
And you've done so much research for many of your books, as we mentioned before. I'm wondering if you might even want to tap into some examples of perhaps the spiritual reasonings that some of the great composers that we're all familiar with. We just listen to their music and take it for granted that they were paid to write this for this prince or that court or this ballet company. But I think you have some interesting insights as to other reasons that are more on the spiritual plane. What does your research reveal to you?
Well, first of all, it has shown that we have a tremendous spiritual heritage in the world of music. I'll be frank with you, when I went to undergrad school, no one even told me, that Bach was a believer. Obviously, of all composers, he's probably one of the greatest examples of someone that really wrote his music to glorify the Lord, and also, of course, to edify people. There's no question. It goes both ways, just as when Jesus said the two great commandments, to love the Lord your God and also to love your neighbor as yourself. In the same way as composers, I think many great composers, not all of them, of course, but many of the greatest composers had a similar idea. They were writing music not just to make a job, to make a living, to get their name in lights, but they saw it as exercising a gift from God. Certainly, Bach is the easiest example, but there are so many others, including some that surprise people because maybe their reputation through Hollywood, like Mozart, for instance, might surprise people. That if you look and read his letters, many of his letters show that he loved the Lord. He really had a tremendous personal relationship with God. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. Welcome to the human race. But he really did love God, and he had a great spiritual impact, I think, on the music that came after him as well. So certainly there are lots of examples throughout history. In that one book in particular, Spiritual Lives, I talk about 20 different composers, I believe, from Bach to Messiaen, and mostly composers in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. There are, of course, many great composers today that have a very strong spiritual appeal and spiritual impact on their listeners as well.
I'm going to jump ahead a bit. And from those early years of playing in rock bands, discovering classical music, and then your early studies in composition. And then in 1979, you founded an interesting ministry in the Washington, D.C. area called the Christian Performing Arts Fellowship. I remember my dear friend, violinist Lisa Beth Lambert, telling me about this wonderful organization while we were both students at Curtis. What inspired you to start CPAF? And what did you set out to accomplish with its performance arm, the ASAF Ensemble?
Well, as we've already been talking about, we feel very strongly about we need to serve each other, we need to love each other. We found that the performing arts world can be a very tough place. Frankly, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of disillusionment, there's a lot of competition. Sometimes it can be, well, just a very tough place. And so we were trying to find a way to just minister the love of God into the performing arts world. We didn't, frankly, have it all figured out. We had never heard of anyone doing this before. We knew that we were kind of going into new territory, but we were just looking for ways to be chaplains, if you will, of the arts world, because we knew so many hurting people, people dying. I don't know how many bedsides I have sat down next to with friends dying of AIDS in the hospital in the arts world. So many people that, are disappointed because they didn't get the job they wanted, or they lost the job they wanted, or they're having physical problems, and and their whole self is tied up in, in their instrument or in their voice. And these are hurting people. And of course, many of them, depending on their background, not all, but many of them do not, have a background where maybe a loving church or synagogue or what have you is there to pick up the pieces and minister to them. So we just decided we would just kind of hang up our sign, if you will, as chaplains in the arts and wait and see what happened. And, all kinds of things have happened, which has been wonderful. But even now, I still I got a call just this last week from a director of a very large performing venue. I won't mention it, but if I did, you'd certainly know it. And he was just, this man tells me he is an atheist, but he calls me up to tell me that his daughter was in a car wreck and could I please pray for her? And I said, of course I will. And we've been praying for her for the last week or so. There's got to be some kind of way to show hurting people that God loves them and they still have a purpose for their life. Even if, you as a pianist, suppose you were in a terrible accident and you broke all your fingers. Well, that doesn't mean your worth is gone. You still have worth. You're made in the image of God. And I don't know, we just found that these are kind of things that no one was ministering to. And so we set out to give it a try.
It's a fascinating perspective because, especially in the classical music world, being as competitive as it is, we are
Sure.
judged by how many notes we miss. We're judged by how many tickets we sell. We're judged by how many
Yeah.
CDs we sell. And
I
yeah,
saw an article just the other day on Facebook, and it said, "How much is a violinist worth?"
mm,
And I immediately thought, he's worth or she's worth infinite because he's made in the image of God. Doesn't matter, if you miss a note, if you play out of tune, yes, it's true, you may not get the job, but that doesn't lower your worth. And this is a very important teaching we have, of course, in our ministry.
and that's something that I don't think enough musicians or artists really hear. We define so much of our worth, our value, on just very much like the corporate worker. How much money do they make? What kind of job or position do they
Sure.
get?
How many concertos can you play? How
Yeah,
fast can you play the minute
yeah.
waltz? I mean, it is strange. Now, obviously, this is a part of the music world, and I can't make the competition go away. What I'm here to say, first of all, obviously, we just want to pray for you. We want to ask God's blessing on you. We really do believe in the power of prayer. I've seen it, it changes lives. We want to just try and love people. I don't know. There's a lot of lonely people, frankly, in the performing arts world. I don't know how many that I've seen young people with slashes on their wrists,
Mm.
literally, where they attempted suicide. It's all too common. I was recently talking to the director, again, of one of the major music schools in America, and they actually have a full time counselor there. I was glad, a professional counselor, but he's just saying, yeah, this is the need of the hour. It's a tough field. It really is. And it's a tough place to find love sometimes. So we want to at least try and make up for the lack of love that we've often felt.
Now I want to jump ahead one more time. We're going to go to 1997, and that was the year that you founded Masterworks Festival, the festival we've been talking extensively about. And at that time, I believe it started at Houghton College in upstate New York. Can you tell us what is the Masterworks Festival? I'm pretty sure it would take 7 or 8 hours to get the full description, but if you could help our listeners understand what is the Masterworks Festival and how is this particular festival different from the hundreds of other classical music and performing arts festivals around the world.
Including some very fine ones, incidentally. I'm certainly not going to down another festival. There's some great ones out there. The Masterworks Festival, it is very similar to a lot of festivals in that it's a 4-week summer festival. This is our 20th year. Can you believe it?
My goodness.
You remember in the early days, this
I
is our 20th
sure
year?
do. I think I started playing, performing concertos with you in your second year or so. I
I
remember
believe that's true.
that.
Well, we're showing how old we are. But at any rate, the Masterworks Festival is a 4-week long summer classical music and also theater. We do theater, so it's an arts festival, performing arts festival that we do every year. It is, of course, very similar to many other festivals in that every day, we're having rehearsals and coaching and chamber music, and we have 2 orchestras, and we have lots of master classes, almost every day. We have so many soloists coming in. We do concertos. We do concerts. There's 40 concerts now in 4 weeks. So obviously
Wow.
some of them are even at the same time, different recitals and things. But on top of that, we have a very it's a layer, but a very strong layer that's a spiritual side to it. We have Bible studies in the evening. We have prayer time that we get together. We have worship times on our Sunday morning worship is like no church. Well, you've seen them. I mean, they have more music than any church imaginable, and theater. And we have, again, uh, the idea is we come from a lot of different backgrounds. Any student can come that can make the audition. Obviously, they've got to play the notes because, I mean, we play hard stuff. This year, I know we're doing Stravinsky's Rite of Spring and I don't know, Ravel, La Tumba de Couperin, and, serious repertoire. So not everyone can just come. It takes a very talented musician. But there's no, a lot of people say, well, gosh, do you have to be a Christian to come there? No, we have people from we have people that write down they're atheists and they come and we welcome them. We try to show them the love of Christ and we don't hit them on the head with Bibles. We just show them love and acceptance. And I think this is so needed in this day, as you know, when, I don't know, I guess with politics and things, so many things have been polarized. And people have, I fear, used religion sometimes in a way that is not Christ-like. We want to get down to basics. Now, I will say we're not theologians. We're a bunch of classical musicians and actors that happen to be believers. But we do try to bring in the spiritual side to it and to help one another and to pray for one another. We still have competitions. We have, a big concerto competition, but we pray for every single person before they play. Can you imagine how many times do you get a chance to audition where before you play, they stop and pray for you, and just ask God to give them grace, to give them blessing, help them, the Lord, to help them with their nerves, if they're feeling, and help them just to know that they're loved and appreciated before they even play. We do that for every single one of them. We do that not only to bless them and have a great summer, but as a kind of example to how to live. I tell young musicians that are auditioning for jobs, don't just pray that you'll do a great job, pray for all the other people that are auditioning too. I think that's the Christ-like thing to do. He said on the Sermon on the Mount, if you don't just love your neighbor and hate your enemy, love your enemies, love everyone. You got to love the competition. You got to love the people that are trying to get your job. That's what we're trying to teach at Masterworks. It's a little different approach, I grant you. We've been doing it now for 20 years, and we would invite any young people that are interested, go to the website. Can I mention the website?
Absolutely, please do.
Thanks. It's simply www.masterworksfestival.org. It gives a lot of information because we have a lot of different programs. It's pretty big. Every year we bring in between 200 and 300 students. They come from all over the world. Last year we had 8 from China, I know, and we had a big contingency from South America, and we always get a lot from Europe, especially Eastern Europe, this last couple of years. And so it's quite a universal or international flavor to it, though we still try to all speak English, so we don't always succeed in that. Thank goodness for music. It's a kind of universal language.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that you're now drawing 200, 300 students, but I remember our early years, so the very first festivals where we had maybe 50 participants and we had maybe half as many people sitting in the audience in a town that really had nobody around. I'm wondering, what were some of your biggest challenges in putting such an ambitious festival together in those early years?
Well, it was a challenge. It's always a challenge. I mean, let's face it. You know the arts world. Of course, it's a challenge. You have to be very creative. What worked last year maybe won't work this year. You've got to be, constantly looking for new things. I think anyone that's running a big festival or almost any kind of thing out there has to be very creative. Obviously, there are financial challenges because a lot of the students, especially from other countries. I mean, we have a number of incredibly talented but amazingly poor students, especially from South and Central America, because we have a lot of contacts down there, and they need scholarships. And so I spend most of my year begging, if you will, going around to different people and foundations and begging for support. I don't mind doing it because, frankly, I think these students are a wonderful investment in the future. And so I don't have any problem at all asking anyone for support. But anyway, you look at it, a lot of these students are very needy. And I don't even know how some of them get here. I think they must stow away in the baggage or something. I literally picked up one student from Honduras last year, and we picked him up at the airport, and he literally had not a dime.
My
He didn't have
goodness.
a dollar. He didn't have any money in his pocket. Can you imagine international travel without a dollar in your pocket?
Wow.
Because he didn't have a dollar. He had spent everything and, raised everything he could just for his ticket. Fortunately, I found a donor to give him a full scholarship. So we took care of him and, we fed him and everything. So he was fine for that month. But it just shows you, wow, we in America, we don't realize sometimes how good we have it. And I know, of course, even in America, there are a lot of people that are really struggling. But when you see some of these kids from some of these places, and boy, they're really having a hard time. It makes you appreciate what we have here by all means.
Now, over the years, you've had an incredible roster of great artists perform and teach at Masterworks. Artists such as violinists Midori and David Kim from the Philadelphia Orchestra, John Daly from the Guarneri Quartet. Of course, you mentioned Christopher Parkening, the classical guitar player, conductor John Nelson, and even the Dean of Juilliard, Stephen Clapp. We could just go on and on with some of the incredible people that you've had. I'm wondering, how were you able to attract such an illustrious roster of artists to a predominantly Christian festival?
Well, I wonder that sometimes too, to be perfectly honest. I told you we pray a lot. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. I think there are a lot of people, though, including the very names you mentioned, and so many others. I was just talking to Larry Dutton and the Emerson String Quartet. He comes just about every year, and so many. We have concert masters and principal players that are all over the place. I think there is a need, especially if you are a person of faith, a need to put your music and your art also with your faith. So often I've talked to many professional musicians that, for instance, are Christians, and they feel like they kind of have two lives. They have their Sunday morning life at church, which has nothing to do with classical music in most cases, and they have their classical music career, which, well, in most cases doesn't have much to do with the church. And I think one of the reasons Masterworks has been successful is we put the two together. I really feel like it's important that we be whole, that we be one person and not two, not with this kind of split personality thing. And so we don't just worship God with hymns and praise courses. We worship God with the Brandenburg concertos and Beethoven symphonies and Brahms sonatas. We worship God in the practice room, not just on the Sunday morning thing. I think that's really important. One of my books is called Worship, A Way of Life. And one of the great teachings I think that we have had throughout the festival is, this isn't something you turn off or turn on. If you're just worshiping God on Sunday morning, that's not really what it's about. If you're a great violinist, you need to be worshiping God when you're practicing Paganini. You need to be worshiping God in the practice room. I know this may sound radical to many people, but it's the only way that we, certainly as musicians of faith, can be made whole. So that's a very big part of all of our teaching.
just if I may just take a quick tangent, what's the difference between practicing a Paganini caprice for the sake of learning the notes and getting on a high artistic level, and practicing that same Paganini caprice with the attitude of worship, using it as a means of worship? What's the difference? So can you explain to our audience what's the fundamental difference? Is there a different shift of thinking? Is there a different mindset? Is there a different application? I mean, is there something else done while you practice? I'm wondering if you can help us understand the difference between just practicing and then practicing with what you describe as employing worship through that activity.
It is a very good question, and it's a wonderful subject. And I just want to start by mentioning it's a matter of the heart. I mean, let's face it, the Bible says that a man tends to look on outward appearances. God looks at the heart. And I think it's a question, for instance, when my wife, who is a cellist, when she goes to practice, she always starts with a word of prayer. And it's not necessarily, sitting and praying for 10 minutes or praying certain words or anything, but she'll just basically say, Lord, I am here to glorify you with the talent that you've given me. I want to do that to the best of my ability in the next hour. I need to be working on these sonatas or these whatever pieces for this concert. But I just want to make sure that right now what my heart is to use this music to worship and praise you. So give me the ability to do that, even as I'm working on fingering and intonation and articulation and all the other things that I have to work on as a musician. Let my heart be to worship you with this music. I have to believe if I know anything about God, he's going to honor that prayer. Now, it is true that my wife, maybe 10 minutes later is working on changing the fingering or, as a cellist, there's a lot of different things that you'd be working on, technically speaking. And she may not necessarily be thinking at that moment of worshiping the Lord, but at least she is very conscious throughout there that God is there with her in the practice room, that she is practicing for God. She's not just practicing for the upcoming rehearsal or for the upcoming concert. She's certainly not practicing to get her name in lights or to get on meet her ego needs or all the other things that we wrestle through as musicians. She's as best she can. She's trying to practice this to glorify God. I have to believe God's going to honor that prayer.
It goes back to that question we were wrestling with earlier. Why do we do what we do?
It's really true. The why is ultimately the most important question. Obviously, you have to do how questions, you have to do where and when, and all those other practical questions. But gosh, if you could be a great musician. Indeed, I was actually talking to a musician not too long ago. It was right before Christmas, a couple months ago. This musician plays in one of the top, 5 orchestras in America. I won't mention the name. He's a tremendously talented violinist. His father was also in that orchestra as a violinist. And this guy told me, he's, I suppose, probably in his 40s. He said, listen, I just, feel like I've climbed to the top of the ladder and I realized I put it on against the wrong building. I don't even like what I'm doing. I don't even like playing the violin. I don't like here he is in a major orchestra. I'm sure he's the many musicians would look with great envy at his situation. And yet he realized as we talked, as he was growing up, no one ever asked him, why are you doing this? What's the purpose behind this? And I think that's a question that we need. Gosh, that's a fundamental question. We can all have different answers. I don't think if you come to Masterworks, we're not going to answer that for you. We're not going to say, here's the answer in this little catechism, you memorize these words and that answers. But we're going to challenge you to ask yourself and to pray and talk to the Lord. Why am I doing this? Why is there another reason I should be doing it that I'm not presently doing it? Are there some reasons I'm doing it that are really harmful to me and to others? It's a life-changing place because we ask those kinds of questions.
Well, it's tremendous. I'm going to go back and delve a little bit more into the history of Masterworks. Now, a few years after it started Houghton College, Masterworks moved to Grace College at Winona Lake in Indiana. And it's over its history. It's had satellite programs in London and in China. And I understand that you have a new home now in Cedarville University, Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. We're so looking forward to it. It's a gorgeous new facility. It's near Dayton, Ohio. Wonderful college. Cedarville, I think, is a perfect match for us. I think we're going to have a great time there. It's wonderfully located. I mean, it's near three different airports, Cincinnati and Dayton and Columbus. So it'll be accessible to people. Many of our people drive in, but a lot of them fly in, of course. I'm really looking forward to it. This is our third stage, if you will. We've had a great time both at Houghton College in New York and also in Winona Lake at Grace College. But now, there comes a time where you're just kind of growing out of your clothes, so to speak, or your facility in this case. And so I really think this is going to be a wonderful move. It's going to take some adjusting, obviously, a new place, new audiences, new publicity, different things. But I'm very much looking forward to our first summer here, this very summer in 2016 at Cedarville University.
Now, so exciting. Now, besides the venues and the satellite programs, can you share with us how else Masterworks has grown over the years?
Well, you mentioned the faculty. One of the beautiful things about the music world, and I think the theater world as well, is the community aspect of it. You know so many people. I know so many people. Your friends know so many people. There's a violin world. There's an oboe world. I know a guy who his life goal is to bring the love of God into the tuba world, which is great. I didn't even know there was a tuba world, but there apparently is if you play tuba.
Oh, yes.
And so what happens is this tends to grow exponentially. I need another clarinetist for this year, and I don't know one. So I'll call you or I'll call another friend, and he goes, "Wait a minute, I know a guy. Oh yeah, I remember. He was a great guy. He'd love to do it." And he knows this guy from this orchestra, or he knows this one that's teaching at this university. So it just tends to spread. And every year we get more people applying. Every year we get more people, of course, asking for jobs. I wish I could always hire them all. I can only take so many faculty at any given time. But it's just a beautiful thing to see. I mean, there are people that will be at Masterworks this summer that I've never met yet. And I'm looking forward to meeting not just faculty, but students. I love to meet the students here. I love young people, and I know you do too. And it's just beautiful to see the new friends that you meet every year. It's a place where you end up meeting friends for life. In fact, we've had literally over a couple dozen marriages that we know of where people met, their spouse there, which is beautiful. And so to me, it's a good time to meet people of like mind, especially if you're a musician or an actor of faith. It's really a place where you're going to meet a lot of people that you probably don't necessarily meet in your town. So that's one of the beauties and the growth of the Masterworks Festival.
If you don't mind, as a closing question, what's the future of Masterworks Festival look like? What are some of your plans for the Masterworks of tomorrow, maybe 10 or 20 years from now?
Boy, I love that question. I could speak a long time about it. I would just say there are a couple specific directions that we're trying to go in. One is we realize that we can't do it all here in America. You've already mentioned we've been in Europe. We now have 2 festivals a year in China every year.
Wow.
We've just started a new festival in South America. We really can't ask the whole world to come to us. We have to do something about going to them. So that's one factor. Another factor is ages. Right now, Masterworks is pretty much college. Well, it's high school, college, and post-college. And that's what it's been for years. But even this very morning, my staff met me with a whole proposal to how can we work also with younger students that are not, quite of the age for Masterworks yet, but still are tremendously talented, have amazing potential. So that's something else we're certainly looking into as well.
Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share so much about yourself and the exciting things happening and coming to the Masterworks Festival, especially with your new location. Congratulations to that, and I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you, Hugh. It's great to talk to you, and I want to get you back at that festival sometime too.
Absolutely. I can't wait. This episode of A Musical Life has been brought to you by the Masterworks Festival, which for 20 years has brought together thousands of world-class faculty and students in a wonderful atmosphere of dynamic Christian faith. This summer, the Masterworks Festival takes place from June 19th to July 17th on the beautiful campus of Cedarville University in southwestern Ohio. For further information or application materials, visit masterworksfestival.org. Once again, that web address is masterworksfestival, all one word, .org. Be sure to visit the show notes at amusicallife.com for links to Dr. Kavanaugh's books and organizations, as well as descriptions of the musical excerpts played in this episode. And please leave a comment or send me your feedback by email at stories@amusicallife.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this show, tell a friend or share a link on Facebook or Twitter. Be sure to subscribe to A Musical Life through iTunes or Stitcher or with your favorite podcast playing app. And consider posting a review in iTunes by going to amusicallife.com/review. Your iTunes subscriptions and reviews help other folks discover this show, so thank you for all your support. Until next time, I'm Hugh Sung, and I wish you a musical life.